Okay, in part two of our lecture based on the Mayans, we are going to learn about the Mayan social pyramid, the role that the king played, and the nobles as well as the priest. And we're also going to examine the importance of the Mayan calendar. So let's start at the very top with the king. In Mayan times, separation of religion and state was unknown. The king, who was known by his title Ahal, was considered a god king who ruled over the particular city-state. As you might expect, the king lived in a grand stone palace in the center of the city. The palace walls were decorated with precious feathers and painted with colorful frescoes depicting scenes from Mayan history, from mythology, or from famous battles. The Mayans were famous for their beautiful cotton textiles, and it makes sense that the finest pieces hung on the walls and doorways of the king's palace. The royal residence even sported an even cooler feature, literally. 900 years before indoor plumbing would appear in European homes, wealthy Mayans were taking advantage of running water and flushable toilets. From his throne room overlooking a grand courtyard, the Ahal, or king, met with his council advisors and nobles who assisted him in running the city. Mayan kings had more in common with Emperor Nero than Henry VIII. In Mayan times, the king had many roles, from army leader to ruler of a city-state to the highest priest to a ball player. That's a lot of headdresses to put on. But as the direct descendant of the sun god himself, the king was responsible for many rituals and sacrifices kept the universe in balance. When times were good and the harvests were plentiful, the people praised their king for doing such a great job. But when disaster struck, guess who got the blame? That's right, His Royal Highness could find his very life on the line if the people began to believe that the gods no longer favored the current king. To appease the gods, the king would offer human sacrifices. They were usually slaves or captured warriors. But in particularly bad times, he would be advised by his priest to offer up one of his own sons to set the world right again. Just below the god king were the priests and the nobles. These people were connected to the royal family either by blood, marriage, or business. The Mayans didn't care too much for chaos. The Mayans kept their social classes strictly separated from the clothes you wore, to the food you ate, to where you lived. The modern notion of moving up the social ladder through hard work was almost unknown to the Mayans. The gods either made you a noble or they didn't. The fact that only nobles could build their houses in the center of the city near the palace, could only eat the sacred cocoa beans, and wear headdresses of exotic feathers, proved that the gods made them better than commoners. Nobles lived a life free of physical labor. They advised the king, they served as judges, they collected taxes, they were the officers in the army, and they served as priests to the gods. The closer you were by birth to the king, the more important your job was. The nobles not only didn't perform physical labor, they didn't even bother walking the long distances between the Mayan cities like commoners did. Instead, whenever they traveled, they were accompanied by servants who carried the nobility on a litter or a portable bed or chair. Of course, if you couldn't spot a noble by their fancy clothes or the fact they were always surrounded by doting servants, you couldn't miss their most distinctive feature. The Mayans had some unusual ideas about beauty. At birth, while the cranium is still soft, noble babies would have their heads wrapped between two boards, which over many months would permanently elongate their skulls. Many nobles sharpened their teeth to point for that extra fierce look, proving that even back in Mayan times, people would do anything for the sake of fashion. The freshly pointed incisors would then be decorated with designs. To accomplish this, the tooth would have a small hole drilled into it and a small piece of jade. Only nobles were permitted to use this fine material, by the way. This jade would be inserted into that hole. The Spanish may have seen the Mayans as a bunch of bloodthirsty savages, with all of the human sacrifices and all, but historians see it differently. At the core of Mayan civilization was a culture where science and religion went together like kittens and yarn. Mayan priests also doubled as scientists, and while they were not out splitting atoms or creating cloned sheep, their discoveries were pretty complex and eerily accurate. In a world filled with uncertainty where volcanoes erupted because some god wanted them to, it was good to be able to gain some control over the situation. Mayan priests looked to the stars and the world around them for signs that would indicate how happy or angry the gods were with the Mayans. These signs were sort of like giant mood rings that priests used to predict volcanic eruptions, good harvests, or even war. Mayan cities could boast of impressive observatories where a priest tracked the cycles of the sun, the moon, Venus, Mars, and a bunch of other cosmic events. The movement of the stars told the priest when a king could go to war, or get married, or hold other religious ceremonies. One of the most impressive and intact observatories is the Caracol Observatory at Chichen Itza. And this is the picture that you're seeing on the right. I actually was able to visit this particular city in Chichen Itza. The Mayans also used their temple pyramids as giant calendars and solar observatories where the doors and windows were lined up in such a way that the sun would shine through one side and out the other on the summer and winter solstice, sort of like Stonehenge of the Americas. For example, the temple of El Castillo in Chichen Itza has a staircase lined in such a way that on March 21st and September 21st, the sun shines down the steps like the body of a giant snake and connects with the statue of a snake's head at the bottom. And you can see the snake's heads here at the bottom. The shadows would be going up and down the stairs that you see there on the left. Each side of the pyramid had 4 staircases of 91 steps, each for a total of 365 steps. Coincidence or not? I don't know. Now, the Mayans also used a very complex calendar system that, even though they didn't create it, became central to Mayan society. The Mayan calendar, as it's called, has gotten a lot of attention for the prediction that the world would end on December 21st, 2012. You might have heard of this. Most historians who can read Maya glimpse tend to agree that this is not the type of end where earthquakes will swallow whole cities and flames will shoot out people's toilets. Instead, this date on the Mayan calendar corresponds to the end of one era which the Maya called a Baktun, which was about 144,000 days. These Baktus made up a special type of cycle called the long count, which marked the beginning of creation for the Maya. Unlike the Judeo-Christian beliefs where the world begins and ends only once, the Maya saw it as a cycle. Currently, we're in our 4th Baktun, which is set to end on December 21st, 2012, which is already passed. The rest of the Mayan calendar was divided into 365 days, plus those leap years. If you would like to learn more about the Mayan calendar, you can follow the link that I have on Edmodo.